Perth Model Railway Show was held on the 25th-26th of June 2022 at the Jewess Centre in Perth. As ever, it proved to be a very popular event, attracting large crowds. Charwelton in the 80s, modelled in 00 gauge and exhibited by the CBM Diesel Group. The layout is set on a summer Saturday in the 1980s, depicting Charwelton Station on the former Great Central Line. The layout is a scale model of Charwelton Station from Church Street Bridge to the south of the station to Catesby Tunnel to the north, along with the quarry line heading to the east. We have used a little artistic license as the rail line closed in the 1960s and have brought the layout into the 80s as a what-if scenario if the line had stayed open and the quarry was now being filled. The layout is run to a sequence based on the rail timetable with some added movements to reflect the change in traffic flows in the intervening years. All the locos and rolling stock have been detailed and weathered and fitted with DCC sound. Burntisland Roundhouse, modelled in P4 gauge and exhibited by the East of Scotland 4mm group. It is a rare event to be able to see around the back of Burntisland Works and Shed, built by the members of the East of Scotland 4mm group of Scale 4 modellers, and observe some of the controls that operate the roundhouse area. The roundhouse has a working turntable and is controlled by electronics, which include a stepper motor for accurate alignment and Arduino electronic control. The engine shed has a TV camera fitted to allow observation to take place. It is also a good chance to observe some of the locomotives normally working on the layout, as well as some of the curious stock from the mid-Victorian period, all of which are scratch built. The model captures the unique character of the historic works building. Hornby 1972 in 00 gauge and exhibited by Dave Coddington. It was 50 years ago that the final Hornby catalogue was issued, the 18th edition. On its cover was a Cuneo painting of the Condor night freight train. The year 1972 saw the Wren range as depicted in the catalogue. Many items from the catalogue will be on display. Interestingly, some of the accessories are still in production 50 years later. Killbagie Mill, modelled in 00 gauge and exhibited by Brony Model Railway Club. Killbagie Mill is a fictitious 00 gauge layout. However, it is based on a real location in central Scotland. The operating era is early to mid 1960s, with steam and diesel locomotives in use. Situated on the north side of the River Forth, just upstream from Kincardine-on-Forth, lay the Killbagie paper mill. Originally built as one of Scotland's largest distilleries in 1720, the building was converted to paper production, which commenced at the site in 1875. The mill was rail connected to the Alloa to Kincardine line, known as the Kincardine branch. The layout represents the sidings and goods facilities at the end of this spur, which were used for bringing in raw materials for paper manufacture and transport of the finished products onwards throughout the rail network. The buildings on the layout are all scratch built, and the track plan allows various shunting moves to be carried out. The track work is all Pico Code 100, with the 2 points located out of the scenic section being operated by hand. The layout is DCC controlled using the Gagemaster Prodigy Advanced system, with mostly sound fitted locos operating. Arbroath, modelled in 00 gauge and exhibited by Dundee Model Railway Club. Modern image layout based on Arbroath Station, set in the period 2000 to 2009. To create more train movements, we have taken some license by reinstating the loop line on the west side of the island platform. This is used by engineers' trains to gain access to the downline head shunt, as well as the local Arbroath to Perth DMU commuter service, a throwback to the old Tayway service. All buildings are scratch built and based on actual structures from the period modelled. Some leeway has been taken in representing the old mill buildings as still being in situ, instead of the supermarket and its car park that now occupies the site behind the permanent way siding to the north side of the crossing gates. Class 158 Express DMUs and 170/4 Turbo Stars are still predominantly in the ScotRail whoosh livery, but with early Barbie livery beginning to make an appearance. As was the case, there is also the occasional Glasgow Stirling route SPTE unit pressed into service. Long distance duties are the domain of GNER 125s and Virgin Voyager sets. Freight trains. Intermodal container traffic is hauled by Class 66s, while parcel trains use Class 67s. Cement and timber traffic are still mainly hauled by the ageing Class 37 units. Engineers' trains. Due to upgrading work on the line, there is additional traffic in the form of ballast movements with assorted permanent way vehicles, tamper and mobile crane. These make use of the downline head shunt and upline sidings behind the signal box. American Standard Gauge Display, exhibited by Graham Pascal. The standard gauge was introduced in the USA by Lionel to counter the European Gauge 1 used by other manufacturers such as Ives and American Flyer, and enjoyed reasonable popularity between 1901 and the early 1940s. While all the manufacturer's track was the same size and the trains and buildings approximately the same scale, the couplers for the most part remained incompatible, making it impossible to mix train cars from different manufacturers without modification. The trains on display today are by Mike's Train House and McCoy. Those by Mike's Train House being to a great extent replicas of those made by Lionel, Ives and the American Flyer. Some of those by McCoy being loosely based on these early trains, but very much to their own designs and bright finishes. Reef, modelled in HO gauge and exhibited by Ian Lampkin. Back in 2004 we started visiting the Czech Republic, and in the following years to travel on their railway system, which was and still to a certain extent much like pre-beaching era in the UK, with freight on the branches, some to fairly small towns. On one such visit we travelled up the very scenic line from Prague to Reef. The station at Reef is anything but scenic, set in a very industrial area of the town. We travelled in a four-wheel trailer hauled by a diesel loco. Upon reaching Reef, one of these trailers was shunted into a siding, presumably to work back on a train later that day. There was also a loco and a brake van next to the goods shed, with numerous wagons loaded with timber in the sidings. Apart from a heavily modified kit for the station building, the rest of the buildings are scratch built. Track is Pico Code 83. Rolling stock is mainly from Rocco, Tillig, Bramos and MTB. Most locos and railcars have sound decoders installed. The layout is operated using Digitrack's command station linked into the laptop running JMRI, which allows for wireless operation using old iPods with the Y Throttle app. Brony Bog, modelled in 009 gauge and exhibited by David and Rob Waller. Why call the layout Brony Bog? We were keen to capture not only those special cameos that pepper this part of the route of this historic railway, but also the dramatic landscape that frames the line. Yes, we have featured Bethgelert Station, but we wanted to present a wider project, and Brony Bog, a name associated with the area around the second horseshoe and a small pre-railway mine alongside the railway close to Cutting Moor, suitably conveyed that broader perspective. And now we have recognition of our layout title from the railway itself, renaming the upper crossing as Brony Bog Crossing in the summer of 2011. Brony Bog will be about a sense of place, about watching a garret hauling up to 10 coaches on the curving climb out of Bethgelert, over the massive embankments and through the deep rock cuttings that will contribute to this spectacle. This layout represents a unique modelling challenge. We needed to capture the many layers of narrow gauge history, back to the abortive earthworks and bridges that were part of the PBSSR proposals of the early 1900s, and subsequent structures and groundwork of the first through line. And finally the FR restoration with its inevitable modern day features. Modelling a railway that was still to be completed set some unusual demands in itself, and all this in the typically rugged landscape of North Wales.